What's the fastest you knew a job wasn't for you?
Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started.
Story 1. First morning at a marketing company. The dudes used the word juicy to describe everything they liked. They played loud music and kind of did a weird mosh pit to get themselves pumped up, to do door-to-door sales. Answer: yeah, I have been there. The coffee shop I worked at shut down, which was sad. I was the manager and had full-time hours. The unemployment wasn't a lot of money either. So a family friend recommended someone from their church, red flag 1, who said they're always hiring, red flag 2. But I needed something quick, so I got his number and talked to him. It was Kirby Vacuums. They had leads, people who had inquired about the vacuums on their website, and they'd send us to 2 houses a day to demo the vacuums. They are nice, but they were expensive as hell, and the commission was like half the price. But before we'd go on our daily meets, we'd play these weird office games, like trust exercises, but every day, with people you only see for the hour before we all head out. During my second week, the exercise was walking out the demons. They had a guy, presumably another employee, in this weird spirit Halloween devil costume, but also on a leash. We were to take turns walking him out to the dumpster and leaving him there. That was my last red flag. I just left. Story 2. Took a job at an adult bookstore. First day, not even an hour and a half into my shift, they tell me I need to scrape the viewing booth walls. Very nearly sprinted out of there. Story 3. I moved cross-country for a job that was starting on Tuesday. The Saturday before I started, while I was still in transit, I got called into an 8 a.m. emergency meeting where we basically got yelled at by the CEO for an hour about not responding to his middle-of-the-night emails. So, 3 days in. Story 4. Back in the early 1990s, I took a bookkeeping job that seemed to be really a great fit. Close to home, great hours, salary. It checked all the boxes. From my interview, it appeared I might even have a private office. Gomer, my first day for orientation, and besides the job I interviewed for, I would be required to split my day at the reception desk, order and pick IP lunch orders, make travel arrangements, etc. It was a second full-time position. No wonder it was salaried and decent pay, but not for 2 full-time positions. When we broke for lunch, I thanked them and said I would not be returning for the remainder of the training. I had zero interest in being a receptionist or an event planner. They were gobsmacked. Could not believe I would pass up the opportunity to babysit a bunch of entitled executives. Fast forward a year, after I went to a CPA firm as a bookkeeper, and we interviewed a financial planner, and guess who it was? Mr. Great Idea rolled 2 jobs into one. They did not hire him. Yay. Answer: I worked in a similar situation, but for 5 years. When I started, I was supposed to be the manufacturing plant manager's assistant, but I was told during the interview I would also be working with the HR manager. They had already promoted the previous assistant, so she was trying to do her new job while also training me. Then someone who handled timekeeping and safety certificates retired, but instead of hiring someone else, they just rolled her job up under my duties. Then I was expected to drop whatever I was doing to go fetch lunch anytime one of the managers or engineers decided they wanted to have a lunch meeting. This was before DoorDash, so I was driving 10-30 minutes away to pick up food. It was a nightmare. Ironically enough, when that plant manager moved to a different position, the new plant manager removed all those duties from my replacement. Story 5. When I asked the guy hiring me what happened to the last guy, the fellow I would be replacing, he replied, well, frankly, his left arm was degloved. Yeah, that part wasn't on the news. This was about 29 minutes into my 30-minute second interview. Story 6. Looking for a summer job while in college. Saw an ad that did interviews every Monday starting at 9 a.m. I walk in and there are already 15 people sitting in the waiting room. I sit down and 5 minutes later, you could hear the manager yelling and then a bunch of voices in unison answering back with the exact same wording. That went on for 20 minutes and then they started hooting and hollering. My spidery sense was tingly. Then the door opened and each associate came in and grabbed 2 candidates and asked us to head out to their car with them. It was a door-to-door MLM sales company. I told the guy in the car that I have zero interest in doing this role. Answer: went to one once. They had vans pull into the warehouse and told us it was time to prove we can use your skills, and that we were going to spread out in neighborhoods to try to sell whatever it was. I said, absolutely fudge not. I'm not going to any other location. Fudge this, fudge your scam, fudge you all, and tried to leave. They made it seem like I wasn't allowed to just leave and got very insistent until I threatened to call the cops or pull a knife. They backed off and I left in a hurry with some others. I'm not about to let some random fudge kidnap me, or worse, trick me into door-to-door sales. Story 7. I took a babysitting job for twin 5-year-olds when I was younger. I can pretty much deal with anything. These two completely neurotypical 5-year-olds were treated like complete babies. I've watched 2-year-olds more developed, like still in diapers, bottles, pacifiers, breastfeeding. I did one shift, quit, and reported them to CPS who did nothing, which I ended learning CPS won't do anything unless abuse is egregious. But I walked in, met the 2 kids, and knew immediately I would never be back. Answer. Oof. Similar experience relating to a babysitting job. Also twins, probably about 5. The mom spanked one bare bottom right in front of me. They had her mother-in-law locked in a bedroom because she had dementia, and they had guns in the house, apparently locked away. But I was not about to babysit in a house with some old lady with Alzheimer's locked up and bare-assed spankings being appropriate for guest viewing. Story 8. I went to an interview for a drafting design position back in 1995. They gave me a test and gave me the salary that wasn't what I wanted, but I needed the job. At the end of the interview, they gave me a list of supplies I needed to buy: measuring tape, calipers, pencils, erasers, etc. The next day I called them and said, "Sorry, I got a new offer." And all of a sudden, they had more money to give me. Story 9. Temp job. Hired for data entry and light office work at a nursing home. They sat me in front of a window where the patients with dementia could walk up and ask questions and beg for help for all manner of perhaps real, perhaps not, issues. The employees got angry if I asked them to help with that. This wasn't in the job description. My grandmother, who lived with us for about 8 years and suffered from Alzheimer's, had recently died. I left at lunch and didn't go back. Story 10. When the cold-calling recruiter said I'd make 12 my salary and go from working from home full-time to working on-site full-time. Literally LOL'd, and the recruiter couldn't understand why. Answer. I do video games QA, and the broad and confusing way titles are used within my subset of the industry means I get recruiters calling to see if I want a job. That is a position I manage, a position that is managed by the positions I manage, or is actually a computer programmer. I rarely get contacts for something I'm not wildly overqualified or completely unqualified for. Story 11. Went to a staffing agency. They put me in a warehouse processing tomatillos. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, I'm 65, and everyone there was basically the height of the processing tables. My back was on fire from bending over to unwrap the tomatillos from its leaf, husk. I lasted about 2 hours. Story 12. I was 13 and answered an ad from our local shopper paper. My dad drove me to the place and I went in, and it was about selling light bulbs door to door. When I came out and he asked what was it about, I told him. He said, "Good call." I became a caddy that summer, and it was more work, but better pay, and actually fun. Story 13. I started working as a car buyer at CarMax and left the same day. I thought I was going to get to use market information and my own expertise to make a fair offer. Turned out the job is just lowballing people and then using pressure techniques to get them to take it. Story 14. I got a job delivering pizzas for tips back in 1980. The lady in charge told me I had to scrub dishes and prepare pizzas while I waited for deliveries, then use my own car, gas, and insurance to deliver and ate pizza. I did the math. It was the shortest job in my life. Story 15. First day of actual work with the guys I didn't fit in. I can take a ball busting, but this was just flat-out bullying. Tried mingle, but was get with blank stares or rude remarks like, "Nobody is talking to you," and I'm not exaggerating. I wasn't rude or disrespectful or anything either. Very jockey, type A kind of environment. Thought I could just do my job and go home, right? Nope. Called into the office by the supervisor. Was told I was doing a good job, but didn't seem to get along with the guys, and how this place is a family. I should have took this as a hint, but didn't, because he said it wasn't too late to quit, and how they would give me a good reference if I decided to. Was terminated right before the end of the probationary period for not being a good fit. Basically was bullied and then fired for it. I mean, it sucked because the pay was good, free health insurance, and a fantastic retirement. But even thinking back, I get anxiety. Small town public works that's a cesspool of nepotism isn't a good place to be without pull. Fudge 'em. I have a much chiller job now. Answer. I walked into a job like that, my very first day working in the oil field. Got hassled and harassed from the moment orientation ended. My self-control lasted until noon, but I was fed up with their bullshit immediately. Unfortunately for my new coworkers, it was my first day in the oil field, but it was my first job after getting out of the Army, having been in the infantry for 9 years. I had instructors and leadership who, in civilian terms, were Red Seal certified master craftsmen in the trade of removing your soul from your body solely through words. They had elevated it past science and into an art form, and it was a skill set that I thought was hilarious and loved. It was like putting 6YO kids from a learn to box class into the ring with Mike Tyson or Evander Holyfield. When each dude would start in on me, I verbally assaulted them until they either went red in the face, cried, and walked away, or started laughing. I got fired at the end of day 3, second full day of work, for not being a good fit with the team. And reading between the lines, it was for bullying, LOL. Story 16. 5 minutes into the presentation, there was a meeting for a job that was supposed to be non-sales-based tech user support in a call center. The advertisement for it mentioned decent pay, health insurance, and a God-matching plan for both a 401k as well as company stock. Company was a startup that supposedly was going to be an app for phones that we would provide the tech support and assistance for. At the 5-minute mark, the presenter started talking about commissions and how we'd make so much money selling the app to cold calls and collecting and databasing user IPs and IDs to sell to other companies for, quote, research, and how part of our portfolio would be all the names, addresses, and phone numbers we could collect while helping consumers operate the app. I think it was a sort of restaurant finder app. I knew I would not accept the job, but I sat through the entire presentation and then went to the immediate on-site interview. Guy was really impressed and even told me what impressed him in the interview when I asked. Then he offered me the job and I said, no, I only came here because it was marked as a non-sales job. He got so mad that I partied too hard his time and asked why I sat through it all. I figured it would be good experience for me for future interviews, knowing what to say, how to present myself, and even build that resume. You gave me some really good advice on all that. That was when he told me to go fudge myself and get out. Whatever. Waste my time, and I'll waste yours. Besides, your company was a bunch of scammers trying to peel data for resale. Hope you're all in prison for selling a worthless app and cheating data out of people. Story 17. Honestly, at a few job interviews, the job they presented on their website and what the job really was didn't match. Sometimes you take a job just because you need one, and that almost always is a disaster. However, once or twice I have taken a job and realized within a week it wasn't for me. Answer. I even had one where the whole company name was different. The job posting and website said one thing, but the day of, the actual company name was totally different. Even the direct deposit forms didn't match the name on the mail. Turns out the founder made a spaghetti plate of shell companies to evade taxes. I'm pretty sure I will be implicated by the feds at some point. LOL. I only stayed on for a few weeks. Story 18. When in the interview they told me they didn't sit around and play on Facebook all day. And the first few days of my training was them sitting on Facebook just playing around all day and not teaching me anything about the job. I had just left a job where everyone was doing exactly that, and I was the one getting into trouble for not working. I was busting my jerk picking up their slack, hence the reason I quit that first job, while the others got off scot-free. Story 19. When my personal phone started getting flooded with work-related tasks and conversations, that was not noted in the interview or job description. Story 20. I worked for an Asian company. I had to wait weeks for my supervisor to return from New Year's with his family, which was about 4 weeks. He returned and he spoke very little English to my surprise, so he couldn't train me. Nothing, including all the computers, were set for Chinese. Eventually, the owner came to the States and hired a Chinese guy with 3 degrees. I asked to be laid off at that point. Story 21. I have issues with loud noises and worked for a security company monitoring audio alarm systems, and so many of them were just loud static noises, and having to focus on potential suspicious audio coming in while loud static potentially would come in was wrecking me. I wasn't prepared for how bad it was actually going to be and had to quit. It was the first job I had to quit without a 2 weeks notice. Story 22. The interviewer was late to our interview for a solar company. He sat on the couch with a stack of files. He apologized for being a bit stressed. Dude could barely focus. Then told me that while it was an HR admin position, I would often have to help other departments. I got an offer a few hours after the interview refused. Story 23. Worked the dorm front desk in college for 2 shifts. Second shift, the guy who was supposed to relieve me was over 2.5 hours late. Since I was new, I also had the shittiest shifts, so this was at like 5 a.m. I called the manager, who told me it wasn't their problem. I got another job before my next shift. Story 24. Going into the military, I knew it wasn't for me before even joining, but figured 4 years couldn't hurt. I couldn't wait to get out and laughed at anyone asking if I was re-enlisting during the time. The other job I knew right away wasn't for me was pest control. Seemed okay at first, and the more I learned of it, the more I knew it wasn't for me. Luckily, I was let go a couple weeks in until I completed some testing. They said they would take me back once I passed, and I just decided to not do that and move on. Story 25. 1 hour, although I gave it the whole shift. Weber manufacturing plant. The position was standing in one spot going back and forth with a paint gun. Noise and such made earplugs a requirement. 8 hours a day alone with my thoughts? No fudge way I'm doing that shoot. Story 26. I made the mistake of asking how long the person prior to me worked there. The answer was 3 days. I made it 4 days. Lucky son of a bitch ducked out quicker than I did. Story 27. I was on an assembly line making fiberglass showers. My job was to roll the bubbles out after the guy shot the mold with a fiberglass chopper gun. I was given a paper mask and paper gloves as my safety equipment. We installed a huge air filter at the start of the shift. It weighed about 15 pounds. At the end of the shift, it probably weighed 200 pounds. I was feeling pretty high about 30 minutes in. I stuck out the shift, but it was a one-dayer. Story 28. This is a true story. In January 1979, I started a new accounting job at TAD Technical Services in Cambridge. First day going up on the elevator with another guy, I said to him that, "I'm starting my new job today." He said, "Me too." Come to find out that morning in a meeting with the CFO and the other new guy that the CFO hired both of us for the same assistant controller position. He then said he would see which one of us would be the best fit and keep one us. By the end of the week, I was sending resumes out. Actually became friends with the other guy, but he was fired about 8 months later, and it took me to November to find another position. Very high-pressure company with about 90 turnover in the accounting department that 11 months. The CEO was named Male Body Part, and it was a fitting name for sure. Learned a lot about how not to manage people, so it wasn't a total loss. Story 29. Showed up first day and was told, "So the guy that interviewed you and hired you left for another job. We're working on finding his replacement." I spent my first 3 weeks without a manager in a new role at a new company. When they hired the first guy they could find to replace him, he was annoyed that I wasn't more productive in the time before he got there. Story 30. When I walked in for an interview and the entire office smelled like straight dookie. Dude just finished taking the biggest shit of his life and had the door wide open. After offering me a LaCroix, I knew this wasn't it. Story 31. When the interviewer was playing on his phone, on paper this would have been a perfect fit for me. The company is considered one of the best to work, but after seeing him playing on the phone, I got up and left. I felt as though I partied too hard my time. Story 32. Second person on an interview said they usually work 80-hour weeks and get paid good overtime. Said thank you for making this apparent up front. Story 33. The interview was held in the manager's office, which overlooked the work floor, small clothing manufacturer, with a 3-window view of what seemed like 100 people sitting at 100 sewing machines, and several of them were crying. There was a supervisor walking back and forth, yelling at people. It felt like some seriously dystopian shit, but in the early 80s. I apologized for wasting the manager's time and walked out. I don't mind tedious detailed work, but with what I saw, yeah, I was not working there. Story 34. I quit a job 5 minutes in. It was a part-time job for me for extra money, stocking shelves in my area for Kellogg. I was 30 at the time, and my boss was younger, began berating me when I asked where I was supposed to go, and I just said, "I gotta go, sorry." If it wasn't a weekend job for extra money, I would have stayed, but no shot I was losing my weekends for that. Story 35. Furniture salesman. Salesman training me. We pride ourselves on our stellar customer service here. First customer of the day. "Yeah, I was delivered the wrong one, and I'd like to exchange it, please." Salesman training me. "No, you weren't. You should have read the fine print, you sack of shoot." Story 36. During my job hunting in 2021, I was told to arrive at an office building just outside Houston city limits for a financial analyst position at a marketing company. I didn't even walk into the building. I stepped out of my car, noticed how this was the only office building in the area, and I saw one disgruntled 40-year-old black man in a suit walk out. He told me outright, "It's a fudge scam company. Just leave, my man." I got back in my car and drove off. Somehow, the company still said I passed the interview and wanted to hire me the next day. Story 37. 1 week working third shift at a textile mill. I knew then that I couldn't swing it, but tried for another month. It literally nearly eliminated me. I was a walking zombie during the time that I was awake. I never could get used to working that shift. Story 38. 10 minutes. Accidentally poured most of a pint of Guinness over some guy's head while I was delivering a drinks order to another table, which involved squeezing past some other diners. I fired myself. Story 39. First day. They explained that we only got paid when there was actual work to do. In an 8-hour shift, you might work 8 hours. You might only work 2 hours if it was slow. But either way, you were expected to sit there all day hoping you got to clock in. I made it 15 minutes. Story 40. Last few hours of my first shift, the manager slapped my jerk as he walked by and said I could earn extra money after hours if I was interested. I was 16 years old at the time. Story 41. I left the onion plant on first break, got into my car, and just drove off. I think it was less than 3 hours into the most disgusting job I've ever done. And since then, I've worked in a human shoot processing plant. Story 42. I started a job at small company as an accountant around year end, and the controller had quit. The CFO ended up asking us to work every Saturday and Sunday. I worked 26 days in a row. Story 43. Warehouse assembly line. Day 1 was a meanie. But honestly, I knew I wouldn't be staying long before I even started. Day 4. I got to move to a different spot that was less physically demanding, and by the second week, I was stacking boxes all day, which wasn't too bad, but fudge with my back for longer than I was there, which ended up being 7 weeks. My supervisor wanted me to talk to his boss and look at promotions, but I already had another job lined up. Plus, that place was pretty segregated, and I found that weird. I'm a white dude. The supervisor and engineer were white dudes, and everyone else were minority women split into groups. And I'm the newest person being talked to about a promotion? Yeah. Story 44. I was interviewed for a marketing position that turned out to be a MLM sales scheme for ATT. I go through 2 interviews and then show up on my first day in a suit, and we have our all-hands meeting that morning where they hand out that day's sales assignments and an ATT polo. I was informed I'd be doing door-to-door cold sales in my dress shoes and slacks. It was over 90 that day. Nobody gave me the heads up to bring comfortable shoes or even water to drink. I asked the guy next to me how long he's been there, a month, and if he's been paid yet. He hadn't. He also told me that they didn't even let him change into his polo at the office, and he had to change in a Sonic restroom. I got up and walked out, kept the polo as a blanket for my puppy's kennel. Story 45. I walked in for an interview, and the place looked and smelled horrible. The receptionist was rude, and the manager took about 15 minutes past our interview to come get me. Throughout the interview, she kept leaving to deal with stuff on the floor. Seemed like a good manager, but the culture seemed toxic from what I got off her, and she was looking to fix it. I was looking to leave a toxic job, not enter another. Story 46. I worked for Walmart for a week back when I was 17. I signed up to be a stalker. That meant cart pusher. Was supposed to be part-time. Got overtime that first week, said no Sundays, got scheduled for Sunday, and they screwed me on the pay we agreed upon. Was a quarter short an hour, so like $5.75 an hour versus $6 an hour, or something like that. Story 47. I had a phone interview with Google for a statistician job. In the first 5 minutes, the interviewer explained that Google is an advertising company, and I knew the job was not for me. To be fair, I think the interviewer knew it wasn't a good fit at about the same time. Story 48. Life insurance sales. I knew during orientation that this job was shoot when they said your income was entirely based on sales and nothing else. Story 49. When the hiring manager said, "Okay, let's get started. We don't have much time." That is, after he joined the meeting and I said, "Hi, how are you?" Story 50. There were 3 people interviewing me. They talked about the company and things not about the position for an hour. When they asked why I was interested in that job, I mentioned this off-the-job ad that resonated with me. They said these were not part of the job. I wasn't going to argue, but I had just read it and checked I was right afterwards. The interview took 2 hours and the vibe was so off. They offered me the job, I declined. Story 51. When I was in high school, I got a job in a call center, cold calling people to sell some shoot. I don't even remember what we were selling. I lasted 2 hours. I got up from my station and told the supervisor it wasn't for me and walked out. I guess that happened a lot because he didn't seem even slightly surprised. Story 52. First day in the Army, I got screamed at for not having the proper equipment issued to me. I had no idea what kit they were screaming about. I wasn't the supply guy issuing it. I knew this job was going to be shoot day 1. I was correct. 20 years. It was still a shoot job, but I've got a pension now, even though I dislike every day. Story 53. Interviewed for an engineering position at Textron, defense contractor, years ago. Manager. You know what we work on? Eliminate people, right? Me. Yes? Manager. Okay, good. Because there are a lot of bad people out there, and we have to eliminate them. I just want to make sure we're on the same page so we can get that out of the way. I need to know that you're a patriot. Me. Yeah, I'm all for protecting American lives. Not with that kind of fudge mindset, though. Story 54. I did some insurance sales interviews, and they seemed to always suck. One expected us to pay for some sort of certification training when we started. Another one said the pay wasn't commission-based when we set up the interview, but then I was told it was when I did the interview. Story 55. At an environmental company. During the orientation, our supervisor asked us to go out into the field and work. We hadn't even finished our OSHA training. You need to complete that to go out into the field. Almost went back to my previous job, but ended up getting better one. Story 56. Wasn't the job, but the manager, day and a half, was hired as the assist manager and was fixing all kinds of problems they had no idea how to do anything about. When they questioned my intelligence in front of workers, I knew this was going to work. Just stopped showing up. Story 57. Realized they were renting a conference room in the business park and did not actually have an office there. Very quickly turned out to be that the business was multi-level marketing adjacent. Story 58. I applied on campus to Dish Network. Turns out it's door-to-door sales. Fine, I'll give it a try. And apparently there's on-job training. But the on-job training was in a field barn in the middle of nowhere. They tell us they're going to split us off into groups, and we'll be driven and dropped off in different neighborhoods. Okay, that's weird. I have a car, but whatever. So we get dropped off, and the last thing the driver says is that if we don't get a sale, we don't get picked up. We were in a bad neighborhood. I didn't try to sell anything after the first house. We were told if we didn't get off their property, he'd shoot us. I ended up calling a buddy to come pick me up. My first 10 minutes was my last point working for them. No one called me to see where I was. No one questioned why I went missing. As far as they know, I am somewhere out there, still trying to get my first sale 20 years later. Story 59. I applied for a job that was described as going to different retail locations and maintaining their Android phone displays. But after the first interview, they wanted me to record myself doing some kind of sales pitch. I quickly assumed that it was actually one of those jobs harassing shoppers as they walk by your kiosk. I just told them I didn't want the job. Story 60. About 10 seconds after I walked in, it was a working interview at a catering company, and the kitchen was disgusting. Grease on everything. Dust. I barely felt safe holding the spice bottle he handed me. He set pots on the floor. I only stuck with it because it was paid. He ended up having me fetch his magic set so he could do card tricks for the clients at the event. I'm honestly surprised he's still in business. Story 61. The patient pointed his male body part at me and took a piss. I quit 20 minutes later, LOL, and then went back to school to get a degree in IT. Now I work from home. No more pissing on me. Story 62. I had gotten laid off from my job as an administrative assistant and taken a position at the car dealership that my husband worked at. They hired me for phone call sales, where you take a list of customers who had been in for either sales or service in the past and try to get them to come back in to buy a new vehicle. It was terrible, and I am glad that during that first week, my friend from my old job called to tell me that there was a position open in their sales department as a sales secretary. I was able to get back into that company and ran as fast as I could from the unwanted job. Story 63. I walked into what I thought was an interview, and there were about a dozen people there. The guy who set up the interview walks in and asks us all to sign ANDA. This strikes me as strange, but it was a tech job, so I figured, no big deal. He then asks if we all tried the product he emailed us. A voice message contained in an email. He lets us know that for only $600 and a 3-hour one-way trip to get trained at their headquarters, we could be on the cutting edge of their idea. Just write down the names of 10 people we could offer this product to. He then said, Let's take a 10-minute break, and I and another guy practically sprinted to the elevator. On the ride down, we both asked each other if we'd thought this was a real interview going in. Both of us were pissed for having our time partied too hard. Story 64. When I had to sell trees on the street, and by trees, I was referring to a piece of paper with a tree on it. They were supposed to be planted somewhere else. Story 65. When the guy interviewing me was 20 minutes late calling me back to his office for the interview, and he never apologized for making me wait or even acknowledging that he was late. I knew right then I didn't want the job because he didn't respect my time. Story 66. Got trained how to use a specific type of machinery at Dairyland. Went through quite the process getting hired. First day I was called in, it was at 4 a.m. in the morning. They told me someone isn't able to work, so could I come in? When I got there, the guy who'd been there 30 years told me he double booked, so told me to spend my shift picking up garbage up off the roof. It was a cold, rainy day. When I finished, I quit. Story 67. First day I was reading safety signs around on the walls. Coworker walks by and asks what I'm doing and responds with, "Oh, most of us can't read around here. Let me know if I'm missing out on anything important." Story 68. Got a job with a company that did door-to-door solicitations for environmental protection fundraising. Thought it was going to be awesome. I get to save the planet and get paid for it. First day, clock in and immediately get out in a van. They are going to train me on the way to the neighborhood we are collecting in. It took 10 minutes to realize that it was all a scam. Got dropped off with my trainer. 15 minutes into following him around. Because I was 30 miles from home. Broke in pre-cell phone days, I had to wait for them to take me back home. He takes off running. I look around and there is a police car with its lights on. Ended up in handcuffs in the Spokeechee car because a month prior the entire company had been trespassed from the private neighborhood we were in. Cop yelled, "Do you know this is a scam?" And I yelled back, "Fudge these people. Of course it's a scam." Cop ended up taking me home personally an hour later. Story 69. Told this before, but went to get a job at a car dealership. They had a job fair thing where they explained what the job was, sales, and what we would be making. They then told us we had to pay $600 for training. That would be given back to us after the first 30 days. Was excited because I was finally getting a job after being out of work for a bit. The money wasn't really a problem, so I agreed to be back the following day for training. I went to a gas station to get some cigarettes and was talking to the attendant, who I knew from him being there all the time. I told him I got a new job, and he asked where. When I told him, he blurted out, "Don't do it." Another guy had walked up to the counter and agreed with the attendant. He told me the company would fire me on day 29 for not meeting expectations, which would allow them to keep the money. The only way I could avoid getting fired was selling a ton of cars in that first month, but I knew shoot about cars, so I knew I would be fired. I thanked the guys and left. The next day, at 9:01 a.m., the dealership called me. I ignored the calls, which kept coming until I finally picked up. I told them I overslept and I would be in the next day. I did this for some time until they got the point. Story 70. 1. Company had worse reviews than MLM scams on Glassdoor. 2. Drove 2 hours for an interview. The interviewer forgot about the interview. Story 71. When I was in college, I got hired at a local restaurant as a cook prep. I walked into the kitchen and saw several food safety issues. I went to the manager with my concerns about making people sick. I had been through food safety and sanitation training. The manager told me that they did it that way because it was faster. I told him he was going to make people sick. He told me to get over it or get out. So I left and called the health department. Story 72. Day 1, when I was arriving at 6 a.m. I am just not a morning person. I don't have it in me to be up that early. Props to the folks who do. Story 73. When they made raspberry coffee the first day and blueberry coffee the second, it smelled horrible. It was a small office, and that smell never left. Just never showed up for the third day or any day after that. Story 74. I once interviewed for an engineering position. When I showed up, nobody was in the office, aside from one old man. During the interview, the man asked if I would ever consider starting my own engineering firm. He said he could set me up with $1 million worth of work right away. I thought that was weird. Toward the end, I asked when they were expecting to make a decision. He said they weren't actually hiring, but he liked my resume and wanted to meet me. I thanked him for wasting my time. Later that evening, he called me back to see if I'd reconsider starting my own company. He wanted me to hire him so he could move back home and remotely find work for me. Like a marketing guy, I guess. When I was in college, I was at a store with my GF when a guy stopped me to ask how much I benched. I was a gym rat, so this happened often. but it was always weird AF. Then he asked what I did for a living. I told him I was about to graduate with an engineering degree and was currently interviewing for jobs. He told me his friend was trying to hire engineers for his company and gave me his card. He set up a virtual interview. 5 minutes into the interview, I was like, WTF does this have to do with engineering? I'm pretty sure it was an MLM. The owner caught wind of what I was thinking, and he was like, I can't help but feel like you may have gotten the wrong idea. We ended the interview then. Story 75. 2 days. On the first day, the trainer left me alone for hours at a time. Granted, I wasn't new to the industry, so I wasn't flying blind, but I was new to their equipment and procedures, and I needed help but couldn't find him. On the second day, one of the dogs I worked with had a proposed female body part that was so severe and discolored that I thought it was a swollen scrotum, until I got a closer look to check her out. I said something to the trainer, and he said, just put her back in the kennel. The vet will see it on walkthrough. That was just unacceptable to me. I walked out after I handed the dog to the vet directly. Story 76. I should have left after the first hour. I got hired as a youth services specialist, and it was disguised as a behavioral health job for boys with behavior issues. When I got there, it was a fudge juvenile center for dangerous youth offenders. The first couple hours were spent teaching me very basic self-defense and given the rundown of the place. My trainer decided to tell me how 10 years before, a staff was taken down by multiple boys with a sock full of rocks. I almost left immediately. I lasted a month before job searching because the staff were borderline abusive to the boys, who shockingly acted like humans if I treated them like humans, made horrible jokes about them, and were jerks to their staff too. One of my male bosses legitimately told me you have too much school. Fudge those people. I got a new job and left by month 2 and reported them to every relevant agency possible. Story 77. I walked out of the training for a mattress sales job when I was in my early 20s. I told the guy I had another job offer that I was going to accept. He seemed genuinely surprised. You've got another job offer? Story 78. I worked in funeral sales for 1.5 days. One day being fed a whole series of training videos, how to get the most out of someone. 0.5 days listening to my coworkers complain about the dead people. There was a deceased person that just came in that day, and my coworkers complained about how little the family spent on their funeral. So little commission. Yeah, it was 100 commission-based, and unless you were doing like 20K sales a week, or you'd make minimum wage. Noped out of there, and it eliminate all dreams I ever had to own a green burial business. I believe it's currently not legal in my state, and it makes sense once you realize how much money goes into funerals. I just want to bury people in the earth for like the cost of materials and let the family use my land to grieve first. But that seems like such an impossible task. Story 79. 1990. Took a job as a dishwasher at a grill-style restaurant. Friday at 4:30 p.m., I show up for my first shift. I went in through the back door. The washroom was immediately to my left. Every dish, pot, pan, and piece of flatware that they had was piled up, filthy, waiting to be washed. I turned around and left, never to return. Story 80. Landscaping. I lasted a week. Walking around uneven ground in boots pushing a lawnmower all day was fudge my feet up really bad. I played competitive hockey growing up and my feet are pretty mangled, LOL. I've worked hard jobs before like kitchen and factory work, but landscaping for whatever reason was just too hard on my feet, LOL. Didn't help that my crew I was on were all weirdo douchebags, and they told me the days would be 7-4, but 3 of the 5 days I worked there, we didn't get back to the shop until like 8:30. That job was just not for me. Story 81. Less than 1 shift at a dive bar. So thrilled to get a bartender job. He had turned off the heat so the toilets froze. He warned me how he sees all, so I better not steal. I couldn't get out of there fast enough as I was stuck there alone with him at one point. Story 82. Went to school for civil engineering. First day we start mixing concrete. Everyone was super into it, except for me. I looked into their faces of excitement and felt my face and soul not into it and went to change my major. Story 83. Went to an interview for a software telephone support job, thinking it was going to be some tech support call center thing for a software company. Turns out they were looking for someone to support software on telephones and were expecting in-depth knowledge of some phone system I had never heard of. Story 84. You had to be really good at multitasking. Front desk receptionist at a chiropractic office. And that is absolutely not me. I get overwhelmed way too easily. and so they were always getting mad at me because I couldn't remember certain things, even though they told me how like 50 times. Plus, some of the customers that came in were so friggin' rude I cried in the bathroom at least once a week working there. I lasted 4 months at that job, LOL. Story 85. Worked at a telemarketing office for about an hour in the late 80s. Customers would scream at you about unsolicited phone calls. Why are you calling them? Their number is unlisted, on. And then someone has the balls to tell me I'm doing it all wrong, and I need to keep pressuring them to buy magazine subscriptions, even after they've told me to fudge right off. Yeah, sure. Told the manager I was going to use the loo and never went back. I have no idea how people did that job and actually lasted longer than a day. Story 86. Lasted 6 hours at Burger King, watched the training videos, shadowed the employees. At about 4 hours in, I realized I am never coming back. Sent me his check for $35 a month later. Story 87. Took a job at a place I'd never physically seen. Got to the office the first day, and the office environment was garbage. Cloth lining being pulled off the cubicles, filthy chairs with stains, dirty carpet, etc. I knew immediately I had made a huge mistake. Story 88. First day as a phone interpreter. I did not expect 50 different accents from phone lines that felt like coconuts with strings on it. I had to make people repeat 1,000,000 times often in difficult situations like hospitals and migrant centers, all while keeping my calm and offering flawless customer service. Story 89. First day out of training, which was only 2 days before they had me alone, overnight dispatching locksmiths for tipsy car lockouts all over the country. It became abundantly clear that none of the Smiths were in this country legally, Israeli, and working for these guys was part of the deal for being brought in. The rules were no calls where the police were on scene, no military bases. But what actually bothered me was, since nobody actually wanted to do this job, every time you called a Smith you woke them up and they yelled at you for the entire time. But also you had to pretend you were local to wherever they were calling from. And it was a cardinal sin to tell them a price beforehand, because the techs wanted to be able to gauge how much they could rip the poor bastards off and charge them insane amounts and threaten them if they didn't pay. Of course you could just not pay in the end, because they couldn't go to court for any unpaid bills because the entire job was illegal and shady as fudge. Turns out my inner voice doesn't like ripping people off or being yelled at in Hebrew. Story 90. At a retail job, I worked there for 2 weeks. I asked the manager to leave at my scheduled time to leave, 10 p.m., because I had an exam the next day and needed to get some rest. Manager blew up at me, said she needed to talk to our GM. Clearly, I'm not available to close. I'm unreliable. There were 6 others doing the same job that night. Just every accusation along those lines you can think of. She threw it in my face. I went home at 10 and never went back. Story 91. Worked for a preschool where neither the director nor the assistant director had a degree in early years education. It was bad. Didn't even last 2 weeks. Between the miserable pay and the way no one understood basic concepts of early years education, I just couldn't do it. For free play, teachers had to set out organized stations of activities where each child would get a 5 to 10 minute turn. That's the opposite of free play. They asked young staff to clean the school unpaid on the weekends and justified it by saying it's what's best for the children. I told the young staff members to stop doing that. If the school needed to be cleaned for free, the director, who was earning 3 times their salary, could come in and do it. Story 92. One day, actually even before I started, had to put all my hair in a bun. I have a lot of hair. Made it through one day and quit. Story 93. Not sure if this counts, but I walked in for an interview. Smoothie shop, minimum wage, college years. First time in the place, and every single worker there looked like they wanted to jump off a cliff. Interviewer talks about how much of a family they all, which is a bit of a red flag when everyone looks like they want to die. Said the job was mine if I wanted it. I declined. Story 94. I went for an in-person shadowing day, so not even hired. I knew within the first 15 minutes. Very glad I had the chance to shadow BC. Lord, that was a hell no. Story 95. I quit a job after a week as an apartment caretaker. I was desperate to leave Domino's after the pandemic and saw an ad in my apartment building for hiring for a caretaker position. I thought I could handle it. I was given very basic instructions and training from the other caretaker, and then just left to figure shoot out on my own. Then came the first apartment unit I had to learn how to clean for the new tenants. And apparently, it had been owned by smokers who smoked inside, so there was cigarette stains on literally everything. I spent the day cleaning the outside of the fridge, trying to get it to look white instead of yellow. And that's when I knew the job wasn't for me. I was out of my element, and I wasn't going to stick around to try better. LOL. I did put in work a 2-week notice, but I barely did anything for those 2 weeks. Story 96. 2 days in, I realized everything they promised was a lie. I had already filled the position I gave up to get there. I am still there now because I have no choice. I kinda dislike myself for not diving deeper into the job. Story 97. Anytime a job description doesn't match what the company says they need in an interview, immediately no. If the company feels the need to lie just to get people in the door, that company is going to be a nightmare. Story 98. Cocktail waitress at an airport lounge where I was required to wear a uniform that was really just black lingerie. My girlfriend got me the job. I did try it on, but I couldn't, so hired and quit without ever going in. Story 99. Tipsy dude threw a taco at me. It was my first job at Taco Bell. I quit, and same day my friend stopped by and asked if I wanted to try firefighting. I lied about my age and got to have an awesome job with great pay and no tipsy taco throwers. It was pretty dope having adult-level money in high school. Ended up using it for a trip, followed my grandfather's footsteps through Europe, WW2, before I joined the military. Story 100. On my third day as a waiter at Olive Garden, my supervisor gently suggested I consider other jobs after I spilled a second tray of drinks on the same customer. I didn't argue with her. Story 101. By about 10 minutes into the interview, I saw an ad for a job doing warehouse work for a book reseller. Went and did the interview. The whole time the guy kept telling us about all these amazing products they're selling, all cheap Chinese plastic junk, and how much money they make, etc. At the end of the interview, the guy was like, "All right, you're hired. Let's jump into this van, drive to a town 200 miles away, and get you started on some door-to-door sales." No, fudge right off. I'm happy to sit and chat with you on your dime, but I don't do sales, much less door-to-door sales, much less door-to-door sales where I have to rely on you for my ride home. And I especially don't do it for someone who lied to get me in the door. Kindly get all the way, fudge. Story 102. 5 days. The owner bragged about his first job being a janitor, so every new employee had to clean the office after working. This was a company running a software for hospitals. Story 103. U.S. Navy immediately after boot camp. Unfortunately, you aren't allowed to quit, but I managed to get myself kicked out of that horrible cult a year and a half later. Years after that, I created Regret Joining. You can go there and read my story. A couple years after that, I immigrated to Canada where I currently live as a citizen. The desire to leave the U.S. started in that cult. Story 104. There was a doggy daycare opening, and the guy said to come on Thanksgiving Day to start work. No interview. I showed up and there were literally 9 new hires there. Within the first 2 hours, the guy was abusive to all of us and told 2 people to leave for whatever reason I can't remember now. Then he berated someone else, and that was when I said that I'm out of here. And if anyone else wants to come back to my apartment, I got some plant substance and we can watch the football game. 2 others left with me. Story 105. At the interview. I'd taken a career break, and when I decided I wanted to return to work, I was invited in for interview for the first suitable job that matched my previous role. During the interview, I realized that I didn't want to go back and work there again. I needed something completely different. Story 106. I interviewed for the new Starbucks on Hollywood Boulevard. That was to be like a quick stop spot. I was with another girl for the interview walkthrough, and the interviewer took us inside and asked, "How does this make you feel, this setup?" The girl enthusiastically said, "Fresh, like it's a fresh new thing." And he ate it up. They high-fived and it was my turn. I have no idea what I said, but I called the U the night before what was supposed to be my first shift to let them know this wasn't for me. I'm too jaded for smiles and rainbows. Story 107. Lasted about a day and a half climbing telephone poles for the cable company. Trainee ID had smoke with that morning, was dead lunchtime. Got another offer and accepted on the spot. Story 108. My first night at a busy, popular restaurant that I had always wanted to work at. I noped out of there when my trainer took the bread from the table after the people left and put it back in the bread drawer to reuse. This was 30 years ago, and I've heard that restaurants still do this. Story 109. My first real job, I was making sandwiches at a deli until I cut my hand on the electric meat slicer. 2 days in a yow. Story 110. When I asked why the role was open, and the response was something along the lines of, "Jimmy was the only person in the company who knew how to do this, and he couldn't handle the stress. He's no longer alive." Story 111. Hiring manager quit my first week, and then I found out that they had enough of the micromanaging from above. Their replacement was a micromanager, which made my decision very easy. I was out of there in a month and a half. Previous employer took me back, but still had to do a background check, which took a few weeks. I didn't want to lose out on income while waiting for it to come through. Story 112. I was 19 and desperate for work when I pulled off a back road and saw a now hiring sign out front of a stone quarry. Stone quarries are a Midwest thing. Google it if you need to. Boss looked like a take-no-shoot guy and told me I'd be working in a warehouse doing quality control, pushing small stone blocks down a conveyor and checking them for damage after they'd been cut. Sounded simple. Turns out the warehouse was a crappy Lowe's carport. No water on hand to drink. 15-minute lunch breaks. No climate control, so basically you're baking in the summer, freezing in winter. My job was basically standing outside while a tweaker with hair down to his jerk ran a hydraulic guillotine cutting 500-pound blocks of limestone. I had to lift the pieces, each one 5,075 pounds, and put them on a pallet for shipping, and I got a whopping 9 hours for it. Made it 3 days before my back locked up, and I caught a cold from working in the rain. Final straw. The tweaker stone cutter dude chucked a giant block on my foot and yelled, "Steel toe shoe check," as a joke. I grabbed him by the back of the neck, pointed at the cutting machine, and told him he'd be next if ever he tried to hurt me again. Left right then and there. Story 113. When I got out of the Army, one of my first job interviews was at an oilfield heavy hauling company. I met the manager and had an interview. It went well, and he showed me the equipment and yard. As we walked back into the shop, we stopped by the lunchroom to meet some of the guys. This was problematic. Turns out that I was acquainted with 9 out of the 11 guys in the lunchroom. I had worked a second job while I was in the Army, as a bouncer at a local bar. I had kicked 9 of the guys out of my bar. I had physically thrown 7 of those guys out. Of those 7, I had outright fought 4 at different times over 2 years, and one of those had bottled me, requiring 15 stitches. Not only did I not take the job, on my way out the door, I ducked into the manager's office and grabbed my resume off his desk, LOL. Total time spent on site, under 25 minutes. Story 114. I was applying for a recruiter position at a meat company. The orientation safety training was 3 days long, and they would give you a tour of the plant first thing, to plant substance out people who didn't have the stomach to butcher cows. Some people would immediately drop out after the tour. I spent 8 hours in the training on the first day knowing it wasn't for me. Everything was in English and Spanish because the employees were 90 Hispanic and non-English speakers. I knew the turnover would be crazy and I would never stop recruiting and realistically describing to people what the job entailed. Skinning and gutting and eliminate cows by shooting them in the head. I couldn't do it. I completed the first day and never returned. Story 115. Right out of college, I applied for a job for industrial washing. No other details. I assume it's like hosing off construction equipment or something. I get to the interview, and he's asking the weirdest questions, like how long I can tread water, and if it'd be a problem if I was on call 24/7 via a provided pager. It took a good 5 minutes for him to come around to describing the actual job, rappelling into industrial manufacturing cisterns for excrement and other various chemicals, using a big sucking hose to empty it. I had to be on call 24/7 because the company was paid more for emergencies and had to be able to tread water for more than 10 minutes, because while you'd always work in twos, there had been a few instances of both the rappel and belay lines failing, and workers having to survive being dropped into liquid waste until the guy up top could find and throw down a life preserver. Noped so hard out of there. Story 116. About an hour into a group interview, they were trying to get us to sell wet and dry vacuum cleaners to the elderly with some very dodgy methods. I stood up and told them honestly, I need a job like you wouldn't believe, but I'm not going to scam the elderly and vulnerable ever, so this isn't for me. 4 others walked out with me and said, thanks for saying it how it was, because they wanted to, but didn't have the confidence to do so. Story 117. It was more than a decade ago, and I had moved back to my home state, which was in the middle of a recession. I needed a job, so I was applying to every min-wage job in every town, desperate for literally anything. I was out running an errand when I got a call about an interview at a pizza place as a delivery driver. The boss lady wanted me to show up ASAP. I had no time to run home and change my shoes. I was wearing flip-flops, and I would have preferred to interview at a job like that with closed-toe shoes. She gave me the impression over the phone that she had a super narrow window to do this interview, so I took the risk. I thought the first part of the interview went well. She asked me about my job history and availability. I had a few questions about the schedule and the general restaurant operations. All good stuff. Then she got up and said something rather open-ended like, "Okay, well, let's check on the paperwork in the back or something. I don't know." It wasn't exactly, "Follow me," but it was sort of understood that I should get up and follow her. She got up from the table and walked straight back into the kitchen without looking behind her once or speaking to me. With hindsight, I realized this was a test she must have done to interviewees. I hesitated at the kitchen door for a second, knowing that logically I wasn't dressed to step into the kitchen, and she hadn't technically invited me, but she also just walked in. So maybe she was expecting to follow her to the back office to set up paperwork. I had a choice, go in or don't. I went in. She was standing at one of the prep tables just inside the kitchen, pretending to look at my paperwork. Immediately, the two workers in the kitchen looked up at me soberly, then looked at her, as if they were waiting for her reaction. Sure enough, she looked up and she glared at me. Right away, she chastised me for being in the kitchen in street clothes, taking extra time to point out how inappropriate it was for me to be wearing flip-flops as well. I was so humiliated that I wanted a hole in the earth to appear and swallow me up. She said something about the interview being over and she'd call me, so I thanked her for her time and hustled out of there before I embarrassed myself further. It wasn't until I got home and started overthinking every detail that I realized what a control freak she was. I reassured myself that she probably thought I was stupid and wouldn't call back, so I could move on to other prospects. Imagine my shock when she called a week later to offer me a job. I just said no and hung up. There was no way I was going to work for someone who treated pizza delivery drivers like that, no matter how desperate I was for a job. If she was comfortable humiliating someone who wasn't even her employee yet, imagine how bad it was to work there. I never heard anything good about that place. I went out of my way to never eat there, and I think it closed down at some point while I was still living in the area. I don't live there anymore. Can't imagine why. Story 118. In the interview when they said I'd be debt collecting tuition payments and to pressure them that it's more important to repay the school back rather than their family member. That was a missed opportunity on the role play when I knew what she was inching me to do, but I felt it was immoral. It'd be begging these people like a crackhead off the street. When I didn't get straight to the point for a question, the manager rolled her and started speaking louder and aggressive. So the vibes felt toxic already. Then they had a director's meeting and she told me it straight. This job isn't for the weak. You'll work from the moment you clock in to the moment you clock off. Multiple screens, multiple things happening at once. They had a bonus structure base salary $400 a month if the department meets their quota, and an additional $525 if you personally do. So she had me in that meeting essentially promising her that I had what it takes to work every minute from clock in to clock off nonstop. OFC, I was stating yes, and I would have had to take it if I had to. By the grace of God, the other position that previously rejected me called me back. So I ghosted the recruiter. The new job as an advisor had like 4 to 10 calls a day when it's slow and was a breeze. And now I've moved on in that same company to back-end analyst and just review reports and watch YouTube all day. The bad thing is it's a little monotonous, but thank God I didn't have to work nonstop like a dog. Story 119. Me. What's your sick leave policy look like? Interviewer. Well, I work through COVID, so we usually expect you to just come in. Story 120. My interview was with the owner, an obese guy in a yellow-stained t-shirt and fire print boxer shorts and a matching bandana on his head. A mysterious New Jersey gangster accent despite being in the middle of nowhere, rural Ohio. And he insisted on having Kid Rock cranking on a boombox in the same room as we were doing the interview. Story 121. Internal promotion from manager level to senior manager at a big multinational company. Year 21 of my career with them. First 90 days or so were awesome. A few hiccups, but nothing serious. I chalked them up to different culture in this part of the organization. Told my friends at my prior position how great it was. So, I had built a proposal deck that our VP needed to review. Looked it over with my director, on Friday. They said it looked great. Monday rolls around and I can't wait to show it off to the VP. She had some feedback about moving slides around and a few notes about add this or clarify that, and director is nodding along and agreeing like they had already given me this feedback. After the meeting, director loses their mind. From that moment forward, I could not do anything right. Immediately started looking for a new job. 7 months later, they laid me off because my position was eliminated. Less than 6 months later, they had someone else doing the same work under a different title. And director was awful to her too. Story 122. I'll be honest, and I got hired. I didn't think it would be that bad. Selling erectile dysfunction treatment. If they say that there's pills and creams, they are lying. It's a needle at the base and that's it. Everything else is a weaker treatment because it doesn't get to the root of the problem. I found after a while I just couldn't keep lying to people, and it just felt wrong trying to sell it. I think I lasted a few days before I said, not for me. Story 123. I got hired as a very young teen by our local milkman to help make deliveries to neighboring towns. He would give me a list, and I would spend an hour humping milk crates with 4 gallons of milk each in them into grocery stores and cafes, while he went across the street to drink in the bar for an hour. This happened at every stop. By lunchtime, he was so tipsy he was grabbing waitresses in the cafe when we stopped to grab a bite. By quitting time driving home, he was hitting both ditches with his milk van. Paid me $5 at the end of the day. Fudge off, Jerry. Good luck finding another helper when the word gets out. Story 124. Brick cleaning with acid. Had to show up at 6 a.m. in the morning to get a car ride to the house, in the back of a ute inside a steel cage. We shivered. This was unpaid tool the Horus start from 8 a.m. when you arrive at the site to start cleaning. And of course, the 2-hour car ride back was unpaid too. So we worked 12 Horus and got paid for 8. There was about 10 of us. You have a bucket of acid, some overalls, some goggles and some gloves, and a steel wire brush. We were cleaning leafed-over cement on brick walls in new factory complexes. The fumes would get up your nose as you worked. The acid would run down your galves, then back inside when you put your arm down, leaving you wearing gloves with acid pooled in the fingertips, burning your fingers. We were working 2-story ladders too. I asked the lady boss the longest anyone had ever lasted. 1 week. I asked her how long she had been doing it. 6 months. She had one blind eye with a white spot on it and numerous facial scars. She used to mix the acid herself. I quit at the end of the first day. Even after 1 day, I lost fingerprint on 1 finger for a decade or so. I also had white spots on my wrists and elbows from where acid drops hit me. Worst job of my life. Story 125. I applied for a customer service position online. I go to the interview, fill out some paperwork, sit down for the interview for them to tell me it's a sales job and not a customer service job. I told them I had not applied for a sales role, and they said, well, that's what this is. So I left. Fudge sales. Story 126. I had a working interview that was supposed to last an hour. 4 hours later, the owner leaves and tosses me a set of keys and tells me to lock up at the end of the day. I was dumbfounded, gave the keys to another worker and told them I wasn't interested and was going home. The owner called me upwards of 10 times later that evening and left tipsy voicemails scolding me. I thought you were special and wanted to work for me. Bizarre. Story 127. During the interview, they showed me the office, which would be mine. When I showed up the first day, I could see the windows from the elevator, where the walls of said office had been. There were 8 telemarketer-sized cubes in its place. Then my new boss said hello, and I could smell the bourbon. I lasted 4 months and disliked every single moment. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.